15 years ago, Daniel Whitmore disappeared without a trace from a lonely Arizona rest stop. No note, no witnesses, no clues, just gone. And then, one night, he reappeared. In the exact same place, wearing the same clothes, holding something that made his mother's face go pale. What happened during those missing years? And why is he risking everything to be here again? But before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single comment, and I love seeing your interaction. It means the world to me. The Arizona desert at night could play tricks on anyone's mind. The stillness was almost complete, so still, in fact, that it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The only movement came from the occasional swirl of sand across the cracked asphalt, stirred by faint, wandering gusts of wind. Above, a wide expanse of stars stretched over the darkness like shattered glass scattered across a velvet sheet. Even the moon seemed hesitant to cast its light over the lonely rest stop on the I-40, as if afraid of what it might reveal. Daniel Whitmore stood on the edge of the parking lot, the sharp scent of dry sage and dust filling his lungs. The air was cool now, but hours earlier, the heat had pressed down on this stretch of road like an iron lid. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that made your skin itch. Somewhere in the distance, a single coyote barked, followed by the faint rustle of something moving through the brush. The rest stop looked almost exactly as it had on that day, 15 years earlier. The same faded sign for Elk Ridge Rest Area, the same peeling white paint on the restroom walls, the same crooked vending machine bolted against the side of the building, its glass smeared with dust, its fluorescent bulb still flickering faintly. A warped metal bench sat near the entrance, its once green paint now a blistered patchwork of rust. Time had touched this place, but only lightly, as though afraid to disturb the memories trapped here. Daniel's boots crunched over loose gravel as he walked toward the bench. His eyes scanned the scene, slowly, methodically, like he was mapping it against a memory, burned into the deepest recesses of his mind. Every angle, every shadow, every sound felt familiar. He could almost hear the echo of tires pulling in, the slam of a car door, the low hum of a radio playing from a truck parked nearby. He could almost smell the coffee his friend Ethan had been drinking that night, strong and burnt, mixed with the faint metallic tang of motor oil from the trunk where they'd stowed the spare parts. Back then he was 21, restless, always moving from one odd job to the next, never staying long enough in one place to put down roots. He and Ethan had been making the long drive from Albuquerque to Flagstaff, delivering a transmission for a customer who couldn't wait until morning. They'd stopped here because Ethan insisted on a break. Daniel hadn't wanted to. He'd wanted to push through, finish the delivery, and be back on the road home before the sun came up. But Ethan had been tired, cranky, and impossible to argue with. The rest stop had been quiet then, too. Only a couple of vehicles, a semi idling on the far end of the lot, its lights casting long yellow beams across the gravel, and a weather-worn sedan parked near the vending machines. No one in sight. Daniel remembered getting out of the car, stretching, and walking toward the bench to wait, while Ethan went inside to use the restroom. He'd been looking at the sky, thinking about nothing in particular. And then the sound of tires on gravel snapped Daniel back to the present. A dusty pickup truck was pulling into the lot, its headlights cutting across his legs, before swinging toward the empty parking spaces. He turned his head slightly, his pulse quickening without reason. The truck came to a stop near the vending machine. The engine idled for a moment, then went quiet. The driver didn't get out. Daniel stared for a few seconds longer before lowering himself onto the bench. The metal was cold beneath him, even through his jeans. His fingers brushed against the rough surface, tracing the grooves where someone had carved initials into the paint years ago. JM plus LR. He didn't know why, but those same letters had been here the night he vanished. A memory flickered, Standing here 15 years ago, the hum of the vending machine behind him, a low voice calling his name from somewhere just out of sight. He'd turned, expecting to see Ethan. But it hadn't been Ethan. Daniel's hand tightened into a fist, the muscles in his jaw flexing. He drew in a slow breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. Tonight he wasn't here by accident. He'd driven 2 hours from Phoenix just to stand in this exact spot. Not because he wanted to remember, but because he needed to. The rest stoplights buzzed faintly, insects batting themselves against the bulbs. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the lot, a metal sign rattled in the wind. The smell of diesel drifted in from the highway, carried on the same air that brushed against his face, cool and dry. He glanced at the vending machine again. The flickering bulb seemed almost to pulse in a steady rhythm, like it was trying to send a signal. Daniel's gaze lingered on it before sliding toward the public phone mounted on the wall nearby. The handset was missing now, only a frayed cord dangling where it used to be. Back then the phone had been working. Back then it had rung. A shiver ran up his spine. He could still hear that sound, the shrill, piercing ring cutting through the silence, freezing him in place. Nobody had been around to make the call. Nobody should have even known he was here. And yet he'd answered. The pickup truck's engine turned over again, breaking the quiet. Daniel looked up just as the headlights swept across him a second time. The driver's silhouette shifted in the cab, but didn't step out. Daniel watched until the truck pulled away, its tail lights shrinking into the distance before disappearing completely into the desert night. Silence settled again, heavier now. In the distance, a set of high beams appeared on the highway, growing brighter as the vehicle approached. Daniel's eyes narrowed. The car slowed as it neared the rest stop, its turn signal blinking. It pulled in, the sound of tires crunching on gravel drawing closer. When the car came to a stop, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was the same model, the same color, the same dent in the front bumper, the same car from that night. Daniel Whitmore had always been the kind of person who preferred the background to the spotlight. Even as a boy growing up in the pine-lined streets of Flagstaff, he was the quiet one, the one who noticed everything but said little. His teachers used to call him the Observer, a nickname that had followed him from elementary school to high school, where he often sat at the back of the classroom, doodling mechanical diagrams instead of taking notes. He'd been born in a small brick house on West Birch Avenue, the youngest of 3 children. His father, a mechanic, had taught him how to take apart an engine before he could legally drive one. His mother, Maggie, worked as a librarian, a patient woman with a quiet resilience that Daniel had inherited. Their life was simple, not easy. Money was tight, and the winters in northern Arizona could be brutal, but it was a home built on routines: Sunday dinners, family hikes in Buffalo Park, the smell of his mother's coffee brewing before sunrise. By the time Daniel turned 16, his 2 older sisters had already moved out. That left him and Maggie alone in the house most of the time. She worried about him, not because he got into trouble, but because he seemed to live in his own world. He could fix almost anything mechanical, lawnmowers, radios, the family's old Chevy, but struggled with small talk at the dinner table. After high school, he didn't go to college right away. Instead, he took a job at Whitmore Auto, the repair shop his father had left behind when he passed away. For Daniel, the shop wasn't just work. It was the one place where everything made sense. He liked the order of it, the labeled shelves of tools, the smell of motor oil and rubber, the satisfaction of bringing a dead engine back to life. But he didn't stay there forever. At 20, restless and needing more money than the shop could offer, he started delivering auto parts for a small company in Albuquerque. It was decent work, long hours, good pay, and plenty of time alone on the road. That's how he met Ethan Cole, another delivery driver who was everything Daniel wasn't: outgoing, loud, and quick to make friends. Ethan had a knack for pulling Daniel into conversations, into adventures he wouldn't have chosen for himself. Ethan was also the one who convinced him to take the trip that would change everything. It was early spring, 15 years ago. The sun had just dipped behind the mountains, and the desert was starting to cool. They were hauling a transmission to a repair shop in Flagstaff, last-minute delivery for a client who'd promised a hefty tip if they could make it before morning. Daniel had argued for driving straight through. Ethan insisted on stopping at Elk Ridge Rest Area. "I just need 5 minutes," Ethan had said. "Man, my back's killing me, and I'm starving." Daniel had rolled his eyes but pulled into the lot anyway. They parked near the vending machines. Ethan went inside. Daniel stayed outside, leaning against the bench, looking up at the stars. The next thing he remembered was the sound of that phone ringing. Even now, 15 years later, Daniel could feel the echo of that moment in his bones. The metallic taste in his mouth. The chill that had crawled up his neck. The way his gut had tightened as he stepped toward the wall-mounted phone, each ring louder than the last. He'd lifted the receiver. A pause, and then a voice, a low, deliberate whisper, saying his name. Not Dan, not Danny. The full name, Daniel Whitmore. He'd opened his mouth to ask who it was, but before he could speak, something moved in the corner of his vision. A shadow, sharp and fast, cutting across the glow of the vending machine lights. He'd turned, and that was when... Daniel! The sound of his name pulled him back to the present. He turned and saw her, Maggie, standing just beyond the beam of the rest stoplight, her face pale against the dark. She'd aged in the 15 years since that night, but her eyes were exactly the same, steady, unwavering, and tired in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. "I knew you'd come back," she said. Daniel swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the scrub grass, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. "You still won't tell me?" she asked. Daniel's gaze drifted to the vending machine, to the carved initials on the bench. He shook his head. Not yet. The desert was supposed to be empty at night. Daniel had told himself that hundreds of times before coming back here, that if anything happened, it would be in broad daylight, with people around. But now, as he stood beside Maggie, he realized how naive that thought was. The silence around them wasn't still anymore. It was alive. Something was moving out there. The sound was faint at first, just a soft scrape, like a shoe dragging over gravel. Then came the metallic creak, sharp and deliberate, like the slow hinge of a door that hadn't been opened in years. Maggie stiffened beside him. Daniel didn't move. His eyes scanned the shadows beyond the parking lot, where the glow from the single lamppost faded into black. From somewhere deep in the darkness, a beam of light flickered, a flashlight, swinging briefly before vanishing. "Daniel," Maggie whispered, "is someone—" But she stopped when she saw his face. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the place where the light had been. It had been there before, 15 years ago. That night, after he'd picked up the phone, he'd seen that same light moving through the brush beyond the lot. He'd thought it was Ethan at first, looking for something he'd dropped. But Ethan had been inside. The light had belonged to someone else, someone who had stepped out of sight the moment Daniel turned toward them. The creak came again. This time, it was followed by the faint clink of metal, like chains or loose keys. Maggie took a half-step closer to him. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. Daniel didn't answer. He started walking toward the edge of the lot, his boots crunching against the gravel. The air smelled faintly of gasoline now, sharp and out of place against the dry desert night. As he neared the shadows, he saw it, a faint glint on the ground. He crouched, his fingers brushing against something cool and metallic. It was a key. Old, worn, the teeth smooth slightly from years of use. A faded plastic tag hung from it, the kind you'd get from a motel. Room 12. Daniel's pulse quickened. He knew that room number. 15 years ago, the car parked by the vending machines had belonged to a man staying at a run-down motel 20 miles east of here. Daniel had only learned that later, when Maggie had hired a private investigator to track down every possible lead. That man had checked into room 12 the night Daniel disappeared. He had checked out before sunrise. Daniel slipped the key into his pocket. He turned back toward Maggie, but froze when he saw her eyes widen. "Behind you," she whispered. He spun around. At the far end of the lot, just under the dim glow of the broken lamppost, a figure stood perfectly still, tall, shoulders squared, face hidden by the shadow of a baseball cap. Daniel's breath caught. The man didn't move, and then, slowly, the man lifted his hand. Something glinted between his fingers. A coin. He tossed it. It hit the asphalt near Daniel's feet, spinning, before settling with a soft metallic ring. When Daniel looked up again, the man was gone. Maggie's voice trembled. "Dan, we need to leave. Now!" But Daniel was still staring at the coin. His mind raced. The last time he'd seen a coin like that, it had been inside an envelope shoved under his mother's front door 2 weeks after he vanished. The envelope had contained nothing else. No note, no return address, just a single coin with the same strange engraving, a thin diagonal line running through the middle, intersecting with a circle at the top. It wasn't a currency he recognized. It wasn't from anywhere he could find in a book or online. As Maggie tugged at his arm, urging him toward the car, Daniel noticed something else. The vending machine light had stopped flickering. It was glowing steadily now. And from inside, behind the glass, one of the snack bags had a folded piece of paper pressed against it. Daniel stood frozen, eyes locked on the vending machine. The light's steady glow felt unnatural, almost purposeful, as if someone had been waiting for this moment. Maggie followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. His legs carried him forward before he'd even decided to move. The gravel crunched under his boots, each step measured, cautious. When he reached the machine, he pressed his palm against the cool glass. The folded piece of paper was lodged behind a bag of salted peanuts, perfectly positioned so it couldn't have just slipped in there by accident. Daniel looked around. The lot was empty. No footsteps, no creak of metal. The desert night was still again. He turned back to the machine. Years of working with his hands had taught him how to manipulate locks and panels, not illegally, but enough to open a stuck glove compartment or jammed trunk. He found the seam of the vending machine door and gave it a sharp tug. It resisted. He tried again, harder this time. The lock didn't give. From behind him, Maggie's voice came, sharp but low. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He didn't look at her. "I need to see what's in there." Before she could protest, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the key with the faded room 12 tag. The shape of the teeth was too small for the vending machine lock, but that wasn't what he intended. He used the key as a wedge, sliding it into the seam and levering it until the door clicked open just enough for his fingers to reach inside. The paper was thick like cardstock. He pulled it out, unfolding it slowly. 4 words printed in bold black ink. "You left someone behind." Daniel's grip tightened around the paper. His chest felt like it was caving in. Maggie stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was back in the darkness beyond the rest stop 15 years ago when he'd followed that flickering light into the brush. He remembered stumbling into a clearing and seeing, not clearly, just in flashes, a small figure, maybe a child, crouched beside a rusted barrel. And then the impact, something hard striking the back of his head, sending him into blackness. When he woke, the child was gone. "Daniel," Maggie pressed, "who did you leave behind?" He folded the paper quickly and shoved it into his jacket pocket. "We need to go." They got into Maggie's car, the desert wind rattling against the windows as she pulled onto the highway. She kept glancing at him, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not until I know for sure." They drove in silence for several miles before Daniel spoke again. "We're going to the motel." Maggie glanced at him. "What motel?" "Elk Pines," he said. 20 miles east, room 12. The Elk Pines Motor Lodge looked exactly as Daniel remembered it, maybe worse. The paint was peeling from the wooden siding, the neon sign out front buzzed weakly, and the parking lot was half swallowed by weeds. A single light burned in the manager's office. Daniel stepped out of the car, the key heavy in his pocket. Maggie followed reluctantly. Inside, the office smelled of stale coffee and mildew. A man in his 60s sat behind the counter, his face lined and tired. He looked up as they entered. "Need a room?" he asked. Daniel placed the key on the counter. "I already have one." The man's eyes narrowed. He picked up the key, turning it in his hand. "Where'd you get this?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "It was given to me." The man studied him for a long moment before sliding a clipboard across the counter. "Room 12 hasn't been rented in years," he said. "Since before I bought the place, it's locked up." Daniel's pulse quickened. "I'd like to see it." The man hesitated, then reached under the counter and produced a master key. He led them outside, the gravel crunching under their feet. The air smelled faintly of rain again, though the sky was clear. When they reached room 12, the man unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit them first: dust, old carpet, and something faintly metallic. The room was bare except for a single chair in the corner and a cracked mirror on the wall. Daniel stepped inside, scanning every inch. That's when he saw it. Etched into the frame of the mirror, faint but unmistakable. The same symbol from the coin. Daniel froze in front of the cracked mirror. His reflection stared back at him, pale under the dim light, framed by the etched lines of the strange symbol. The diagonal slash intersecting the circle at the top was shallow but deliberate, carved with the precision of someone who had done it many times before. Maggie stepped up beside him. "That's the same mark from the coin, isn't it?" Daniel nodded slowly. His chest felt tight, his mind already digging backward through years of buried memories. "It's more than that," he said. "This isn't the first place I've seen it." Her eyes searched his face. "Where?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "On a door the night I disappeared." He hadn't told anyone this, not the police, not Maggie, not even Ethan. That night, after answering the mysterious phone call, he'd followed the light into the desert. He'd reached a clearing where a small, weathered shack stood, almost hidden among the trees. The mark had been scratched into its door just above the handle. Inside, there had been a child. He could still see her, small, barefoot, no older than 8. She had looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, clutching something close to her chest. He had crouched down, whispering that it was okay, that he was going to help her. But before he could get her out, the blow to his head had sent him into darkness. When he woke, the shack was empty, no child, no sound. Only the mark on the door burned into his memory. "Daniel," Maggie said quietly. "Who was she?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever she was, she's the reason I was taken." The manager's voice cut in from the doorway. "If you're going to poke around, I'd appreciate it if you didn't damage anything." Daniel turned to him. "Who put that mark there?" The man frowned. "I've seen it before. Not here, though." A few years back, there was talk about a group moving through the state. People said they were involved in trafficking. Always left that mark behind. Never stayed in the same place twice. Daniel felt a cold wave move through him. This wasn't random. The key, the coin, the note. Someone was pulling him back into something they didn't want forgotten. He stepped away from the mirror and scanned the room again. That's when he noticed the chair in the corner. It wasn't positioned naturally. It was angled slightly toward the window, as if someone had sat there watching the parking lot. He moved toward it, crouching down to look underneath. His fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the seat. He peeled it away slowly, a small weathered envelope, the paper brittle with age. Inside was a photograph. Daniel's breath caught. It was the girl from the shack, the same wide eyes, the same bare feet. She was standing in front of a rusted barrel, clutching a stuffed rabbit. But there was something else. Behind her, half in shadow, stood a man. His face was obscured by the brim of a baseball cap. Daniel turned the photo over. Written in small, careful handwriting were the words, "She's still alive." Maggie gasped. "My God. Daniel, who sent this to you?" He didn't answer. Because he already knew. The coin, the key, the note, the photograph. All of it pointed to one person, Ethan Cole. Daniel didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit. Ethan had been the last person to see him that night. Ethan had vanished from the rest stop minutes before the phone rang. Ethan had been the one to insist they stop there in the first place. "Daniel," Maggie said cautiously, "are you saying Ethan—" "I'm saying," Daniel interrupted, "that Ethan knows a lot more than he's ever told me." They left the motel, the night pressing down heavier now. Daniel drove this time, heading toward Flagstaff. He needed to see Ethan face to face. Maggie sat in silence beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When they pulled up to Ethan's house, the windows were dark. Daniel knocked once, twice, no answer. He was about to knock a third time when he noticed something on the doorframe, scratched into the wood, faint but unmistakable. The symbol? His stomach turned. He tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of dust and something faintly metallic, like the motel room. The living room was empty, but on the coffee table sat an envelope, his name written in bold black letters. He tore it open. Inside was another photograph. This one was recent. The girl, older now, maybe in her 20s, was standing in a crowded street somewhere overseas. She was looking directly at the camera, and she was holding the same stuffed rabbit. Daniel stared at the photograph as if it might vanish if he blinked. His pulse thudded in his ears. The girl, no, the young woman now, was alive. The same eyes, the same guarded expression. Time had changed her, but the rabbit in her hands, that was the same as the night in the shack. The fur looked worn, one ear drooping, its button eye hanging loose. Maggie stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. She made it. Daniel nodded, but the relief was tangled with something else. Guilt. "If she made it," he said slowly, "why send this to me? Why now?" Maggie's brow furrowed. "Maybe she needs help." He shook his head. "No, this is a message." He tapped the photo. "She's telling me she remembers." They searched the rest of Ethan's house, but it was clear he hadn't been there in days. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood, just an eerie emptiness, as if he'd left knowing someone would come looking. In the kitchen, Daniel found a single note taped inside the cupboard. No words, just the coin symbol drawn in black marker. Maggie leaned against the counter. "Daniel, I think you need to tell me everything, all of it. No more pieces." He took a deep breath and told her. The phone call, the light in the desert, the shack, the girl, the blow to the head, waking up miles away with no memory of how he got there, and the years since, years he'd spent trying to bury it, convincing himself it was safer not to know. When he finished, Maggie was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "You didn't just disappear that night. You were taken because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you saw something they couldn't risk you talking about." Daniel looked at her. "Then why let me go?" Her eyes softened. "Because you promised to keep quiet, and maybe because you kept it." They left Ethan's house just before midnight. The streets of Flagstaff were quiet. the air carrying the faint scent of pine. Daniel drove aimlessly at first, his thoughts spinning. He should take the photo to the police. He should give them the coin, the key, the note. But he knew what would happen. They'd open an investigation, and she'd disappear again. Whoever had kept her hidden for all these years wouldn't hesitate to make her vanish permanently. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice, low and steady. "You have something that belongs to me." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" A pause, then, "She remembers you." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now. But if you want her to stay that way, you'll stop looking for Ethan." The line went dead. Maggie was watching him. "What did they say?" Daniel swallowed. "They know I'm looking." The next morning, Daniel sat alone at the Elk Ridge rest area bench. The same bench, the same initials carved into the paint. He turned the photograph over and over in his hands, memorizing every detail. He thought about the girl, what her life had been, what it was now. If she'd been taken, how had she survived? And why reach out to him after all this time? A pickup truck pulled into the lot. His pulse spiked. But it wasn't the shadowed man from before. It was a woman in her 50s wearing a denim jacket. She got out, crossed the lot, and sat down beside him. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know what happened to you. And to her." Daniel turned to look at her. Her eyes were sharp, focused. "Who are you?" "Her aunt," she said simply. "And I think it's time you learned the truth about Ethan." Daniel studied the woman beside him, trying to read her face. The wind swept through the parking lot, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. It was morning now, and the desert light revealed every line on her skin, every shadow beneath her eyes. "You said you're her aunt," Daniel said cautiously. "Her real aunt?" She nodded. "Her name is Emily. She was taken from our family when she was 8. I've been looking for her ever since." Daniel felt the name settle in his chest. Emily. The woman, her name was Claire, told him everything. Emily's mother had been involved with people she shouldn't have trusted. When she tried to leave, they retaliated by taking Emily. For years, Claire had followed rumors, dead ends, and false sightings. Then, 15 years ago, she heard a whisper that Emily had been seen near a rest stop in Arizona. By the time Claire arrived, both Emily and Daniel were gone. "I didn't know about you then," Claire said. "But when I heard your name again recently, I knew you were part of her story. You were the only person who tried to help her." Daniel's throat tightened. "I failed her." "No," Claire said firmly. "You gave her hope. She remembers you because you were the first person in years who didn't look at her like she was invisible." They sat in silence for a while. Daniel thought about the photograph, the rabbit, the symbol carved into the mirror. All the years he'd spent not talking about that night. And now, the weight of it felt different, less like a secret and more like a responsibility. "What about Ethan?" Daniel asked. Claire's expression darkened. "He was part of it. Maybe not from the start, but he got pulled in. And when you disappeared, he made a deal to keep you alive. In exchange, he stayed quiet, and so did you, because you didn't know the truth." The words hit Daniel like a punch. Ethan, his friend, his only companion on that road, had chosen silence over justice. "Where is he now?" Daniel asked. Claire shook her head. "Gone, but not far. They don't let people walk away. If he's still breathing, it's because they want him to be." Daniel looked out across the empty desert. He realized he had a choice. He could walk away again, pretend none of this was his burden, or he could keep going, knowing the risks. Claire rose from the bench. "If you decide you want to find her, really find her, you won't be alone. But you have to move carefully. No police, no press, just people who know what they're up against." Daniel stood, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. "I'm in." Claire nodded once, then walked back to her truck. She drove off, leaving him alone in the same spot where everything had begun 15 years earlier. Daniel sat back down on the bench. The initials carved into the paint were still there, unchanged, untouched. The wind picked up, rattling the vending machine's glass. He closed his eyes and listened. The sound of tires on gravel, the faint hum of a radio, the memory of a phone ringing in the dark. He opened his eyes. The lot was empty again. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost of that night. He felt like someone who had unfinished business. Daniel stood, slid the photograph into his jacket pocket, and walked toward his car. The same desert stretched before him, endless and unforgiving. But now it wasn't just the place where he'd lost 15 years, it was the place where he was going to take them back.